Hi, folks. Dr. Dchek. It is Wednesday, August 19th, checking in on our continuing educational forum. I just want to talk today briefly. It's sort of a current events issue vis-a-vis COVID, and it made the news over the last 24 hours, which I'm sure you've all been reading about. Um, Many of us, many physicians have been working very, very aggressively to get the schools open this coming school season, in a few weeks. And when I say working aggressively, I can tell you in detail that, for instance, I've been working with currently, I think, 13 schools across the New York, Brooklyn, Manhattan, New Jersey areas, just consulting on strategies for opening the schools, coming up with testing protocols, coming up with school classroom design, advice on how to manage children who are sick in school, educating parents, things like that. We've been working so hard, and especially me as a pediatrician, it's a subject close to my heart because I recognize how urgent it is to get kids back into a normal school setting and out of the home. Uh, what we've experienced as communities and as a country for the last 6 months has been very unusual for children and for families. And it obviously will have long lasting impacts if we can't resolve it. So we're I think pretty much most people that I talk to are very much on board with getting the schools back up and running and working aggressively to make it happen. And the schools have been wonderful so far, many of the schools in cooperating with some of those strategies. Here lies the problem that right now we're dealing, for instance, in the Brooklyn area and in upstate New York, we're dealing with a significant number of new cases, not terribly sick cases, but new cases. And these cases, many of them have come from indoor events like weddings and celebrations of the like. Some of these weddings have been 3, 4, 500 people indoors. Um, there's been at least 3 weddings that I have had patients and individuals in my own community who've tested positive. These cases have been all over the place. We've had positives as a result of certain weddings upstate. We've had positives in Lakewood. We've had positives in other cities, Toronto, Baltimore, and many other places as a result of some of these indoor weddings. If people are going to make indoor weddings right now, there should be limitations on it, limitations on the size of the wedding, and that you don't need government to enforce those rules. It's really logic, and to bring several hundred people together in close circumstance without the use of masks or social distancing, spending 4 hours together at a simcha dancing and singing, is a recipe for disaster right now in terms of the schools reopening. This is what the concern is of most physicians in my position, and the physician groups that I'm a part of have been discussing this very much in the last week, how these new cases, these new clusters of cases are putting at risk the reopening of schools right now. And we don't want that. We need the schools to reopen. Here's a worst case scenario. We have an influx of a lot of new cases in the next 2 weeks. And one of those cases gets into a classroom, and boom, that classroom is now under quarantine for 14 days. If it spreads to the rest of the school, the whole school could be under quarantine for 14 days. Those are the guidelines from the New York City Department of Health and Department of Education right now. And the schools are holding to the guidelines that are being laid out by the Department of Health and Department of Education. So there's so much at risk here by seeding new cases within our community. So I want people to be cautious. If you're invited to weddings, if you're invited to large indoor events, please take precautions. At the very least, wear a mask. I've attended several of these weddings in the last few weeks. My wife and I don't stay very long at these indoor weddings. If it's outdoor, we have no problem at all. We'll wear our mask. Indoors, I've attended a couple of chuppahs wearing a mask. In most of the cases, we were the only ones wearing the mask or one of very few. It's important if you're going to go to an indoor event right now, whether it's 15 people or 50 people or 200 people, you should be wearing a mask when you're spending a lot of time indoors with a large group of people. We want to make sure the schools reopen. We want to make sure the schools stay open. One of the risks right now is we get to reopen the schools in 2 weeks, and within a week or so, we have 10, 15 new cases in any particular school, and the whole school gets shut down for a period of a minimum of 14 days. That would be a horrible scenario, and one that would damage our ability to get the schools up and running again. So as a physician group, I think all physicians are appealing to people right now. Please be careful. Wear a mask if you're going to, especially if you're going to go to an indoor event. If you're shopping in a store, don't make scenes in the store. Put on a mask when you go into a store. These are all logical steps. You don't need 100 scientific studies to prove that a certain activity is risky or that a certain activity is beneficial, like wearing a mask. This is not a political debate. It's life and death, and certainly it's the life of our children that we want to preserve in a normal way by getting them back to school. So let's get the cases under control. If you do test positive, please don't go shopping a negative result once you test positive. If you're positive, you quarantine until you're feeling better. Go by the CDC guidelines. Generally, it's 10 days from the time you're feeling better. There's a 10-day quarantine period in total from the time you're improving. For your family members, if you are positive, they are under 14-day quarantine. And I would remind you, for those people who are now flying to different locations throughout the United States, here in New York, there's actually a list of states which are on the New York City Department of Health website and the New York State DOH website. If you return from those cities or those states and they're hot zones, you have to quarantine for 14 days at home. I have a patient who contacted me today who had to go to a certain state that's a hot zone for a funeral, flew back, and their question was, what do they do other than get tested? And the answer is they are on 14-day quarantine until that is over. By the way, you can't test out of quarantine. If you're quarantined, even if you take a swab and you're negative, you still are obligated to spend 14 days not putting others at risk. So I think we're going to call it a day, and hopefully the information was useful. Remember, if you go into indoor events like weddings, please wear a mask. Don't be embarrassed to wear a mask. And for those of you who are critical of others wearing a mask, don't shame people who do wear masks. It's very appropriate to wear a mask indoors right now, whether it's synagogue, church, weddings, whatever the event is. Please wear a mask if you're going to be indoors with other people. Have a great evening, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. Hope everybody is continuing in good health. Bye-bye.